Kim Jong-nam, the exiled heir of North Korea. Part 1. Birth in the Shadows of the Dynasty. In the early spring of 1971, within the cloistered, enigmatic capital of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, a child was born under a veil of secrecy, a child whose very existence would come to symbolize the complexities, contradictions, and vulnerabilities of the world's most opaque ruling dynasty. That child was Kim Jong-nam, the eldest son of Kim Jong-il, himself the son of the nation's founder and eternal president, Kim Il-sung. Yet for all the prestige carried by his bloodline, Kim Jong-nam was born not into the spotlight of power, but into the shadows of a scandal that would haunt his entire life. His mother, Hye-rim, was not the typical consort one would expect for the heir to North Korea's revolutionary throne. A popular film actress in the 1960s, she had captivated audiences with her beauty and charm on screen. Her romance with Kim Jong-il, however, was far more perilous than glamorous. When their relationship began, Hye-rim was already married and had a child from her previous marriage. Facts that would have spelled disgrace, even expulsion, had they been made public in North Korea's hyper-moralized and ideologically rigid society. At the time, Kim Jong-il was still a rising star within the North Korean political hierarchy. Though already designated as the likely successor to his father, Kim Il-sung, he was still consolidating his power base, building a cult of personality around himself, and maneuvering within a family structure riddled with jealousy, factionalism, and ambition. For a man in his position, falling in love with a divorced woman, especially one who was already a mother, was a political liability of the highest order, and fathering a child with her in secret was even riskier. Thus, the birth of Kim Jong-nam on May 10, 1971, was an event celebrated only in whispers. Rather than being hailed publicly as the future of the revolution, Jong-nam was hidden away, raised far from the prying eyes of the inter-party elite or foreign diplomats. His upbringing took place within a luxurious but isolated villa compound in Pyongyang, surrounded by high walls, guards, and silence. His world was small and tightly controlled, and his contact with the outside world, including other members of his extended family, was minimal. He was, in every sense, a prince in a gilded cage. His caretakers in these early years were his maternal grandmother and his aunt Hye-rim. They took on the role of both protectors and educators, striving to give Jong-nam as normal a childhood as was possible under the circumstances. His mother, Hye-rim, suffered from bouts of depression and illness, exacerbated by her isolated life and the knowledge that her child was being raised in political limbo. Though she was still occasionally visited by Kim Jong-il, she knew that her status as a de facto mistress, rather than a recognized wife, meant her position and that of her son was forever precarious. Despite the secrecy, there were key figures within the Kim family who took an interest in the boy's fate. Chief among them was Kim Jong-il's sister, Kim Kyung-hwa, a sharp, politically astute woman who would go on to become a central figure in North Korean power politics. She is said to have taken a deep personal liking to Jong-nam and even made efforts to raise him as her own. Whether motivated by genuine affection or political strategy, or both, her support would prove crucial in bringing Jong-nam out of the shadows and into the reluctant light of succession. In time, even the supreme leader himself, Kim Il-sung, was brought into the secret. Through the intercession of Kim Kyung-hwa and her husband, Jang Song-taek, a rising star in his own right within the Workers' Party, Kim Il-sung gradually accepted the child. Reports suggest that he grew fond of Jong-nam, who would become the first grandson to receive his formal acknowledgement. Kim Il-sung, it is said, enjoyed the boy's company and began to treat him as his favorite, making up for his son's emotional distance with grandfatherly affection. This favoritism would manifest in tangible ways. On Jong-nam's birthday, no expense was spared. Reports from defectors and foreign intelligence sources suggest that each year, up to $1 million was spent on his birthday gifts alone. Lavish toys, electronics, custom-made clothing, and imported goods poured in from abroad, all symbols of his privileged status within the ruling family. These celebrations were not merely familial, they were political, a signal to those in the know that Jong-nam was being groomed for something greater. Meanwhile, far from Pyongyang, Kim Jong-il's other children, Kim Jong-chul and Kim Jong-un, born from his later consort Ko Yong-hoi, lived relatively quietly in Wonsan, a coastal city removed from the center of power. They were younger, less visible, and lacked the grandfather's endorsement that Jong-nam enjoyed. For a time it seemed clear. Jong-nam was the chosen one, the heir presumptive, the crown prince of the world's most secretive monarchy. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Kim Jong-il continued to keep his relationship with Song Hye-rim unofficial and never publicly acknowledged Jong-nam as his son. This silence bred rumors and created vulnerabilities. In a regime where legitimacy and symbolism were everything, Jong-nam's very origin, born of a love affair, outside the public eye, in a country that worshipped bloodlines and obedience, would always haunt him. Thus, from the moment of his birth, Kim Jong-nam's life was shaped by contradiction. He was the firstborn of a future dictator, yet he was hidden from view. He was showered with affection and wealth, yet denied public recognition. He was groomed as a successor in private, while others maneuvered in public. His earliest memories were not of joyful freedom, but of careful containment. He was, in every sense, born in the shadows of the dynasty he was expected to one day lead. But the world outside those walls would eventually beckon, and with it would come change, exile, and ultimately, tragedy. Part 2, A Princeling Abroad, the formative years in foreign lands. In the cloistered and hyper-controlled atmosphere of Pyongyang, even the children of the ruling family lived under constant surveillance. But Kim Jong-nam, the first son of the future leader Kim Jong-il, was not destined to remain confined to the bubble of the North Korean capital. In a departure that was unusual, if not unprecedented, for a child of the Kim dynasty, Jong-nam spent a significant part of his youth outside North Korea's tightly sealed borders. His journey abroad would not only educate him in the academic sense, but expose him to ideas and values that would ultimately shape his worldview and alienate him from the authoritarian regime he was born into. In 1979, at the age of just 8, Kim Jong-nam was quietly sent overseas. His destination was the Soviet Union, the patron state of North Korea, and the ideological cradle of the communist world. It was in Moscow, the bustling heart of the Soviet Empire, where he first experienced life beyond the rigid constraints of Juche ideology. There, from the age of 12 to 14, he lived under an assumed identity in order to avoid drawing attention from foreign intelligence or the curious eyes of other diplomats' families. The Soviet Union, though far from free by Western standards, was still a place where ideas circulated with greater ease than in North Korea. For young Jong-nam, even this limited exposure to the outside world opened doors that could never be closed again. His time in Moscow planted the seeds of curiosity. He saw the cracks in the Soviet system, the contradictions between propaganda and reality, and perhaps began to draw parallels to his own homeland. But it was not until he moved to Western Europe that the real transformation began. In the early 1980s, Kim Jong-nam was enrolled in an international school in Bern, Switzerland, a cosmopolitan city nestled in the heart of Europe. There, he was no longer merely a hidden prince of a closed kingdom. He became one student among many, a teenager immersed in a diverse environment where the children of diplomats, businessmen, and international elites mingled. He was surrounded by languages, cultures, and customs from across the globe. For the first time in his life, he tasted the freedoms that North Koreans could scarcely imagine. Uncensored books, international media, open political debate, and the ability to walk down a street without a bodyguard. In Switzerland, he was known by a pseudonym and spoke multiple languages, French, English, and some German. His fluency impressed his classmates and teachers, though few knew the truth of his origins. He took a keen interest in technology, a field that was just beginning to revolutionize the modern world. In a country famed for its precision and neutrality, he gained not only an education, but a sense of independence. Later, Jong-nam reportedly enrolled at the University of Geneva, furthering his academic journey. By this point, he had become proficient in French and English and had a working knowledge of Russian and Chinese. He even dabbled in Japanese, though his spoken ability remained limited. Nevertheless, his linguistic skills were extraordinary for a North Korean, and a reflection of the global exposure he had received, far removed from the insular worldview cultivated by the regime back home. It was also during this period that he developed an interest in computers. According to those who knew him or later encountered him, he became fascinated by the potential of information technology. In a nation like North Korea, where control over information was paramount, this interest would take on a deeper significance in his later roles. The ability to harness data, software, and networks would position him as a potential reformer, someone who saw not just power in the traditional military sense, but in the invisible realm of cyber influence. In 1995, Jong-nam moved once again, this time to Beijing, China's ancient capital and the new engine of Asian modernity. It was here that the contrast between communist authoritarianism and economic liberalism struck him with full force. He witnessed firsthand the rise of Shanghai as a glittering metropolis, a city that had embraced market reforms while still retaining tight political control. This hybrid model deeply impressed Jong-nam. He reportedly began to envision a similar path for his own country, one where North Korea could retain the stability of single-party rule while unlocking the creative and economic potential of its people. In the bustling streets of Beijing and Shanghai, he studied not just the skyline, but the culture of reform. He understood that modernization did not necessarily mean democratization, and that opening markets could coexist with a centralized state. This idea, this vision of reform without revolution, would become one of the defining beliefs of his later life. By the time Jong-nam returned to North Korea in the late 1980s, he was no longer the same boy who had left Pyongyang years earlier. He had absorbed the intellectual traditions of the West, the technological dynamism of the East, and the strategic calculations of reforming communists across Eurasia. He spoke multiple languages, had navigated different cultures, and had tasted personal freedom in ways his compatriots could never fathom. He had been shaped not by the ideology of his grandfather or the cold brutality of his father, but by the schools of Switzerland and the skyscrapers of China. Yet this very experience, which had broadened his mind and equipped him for leadership in the modern world, would soon make him a threat in the eyes of those who clung to the purity of the revolutionary past. For the Kim dynasty, loyalty and obedience were often more valued than vision and innovation. Jong-nam's global upbringing, though impressive, would set him on a path not to power, but to exile. In the years ahead, the very knowledge and open-mindedness he had cultivated abroad would become the tools of his alienation. He would dream of reform, speak of change, and challenge the direction of his homeland, but from the margins, not the throne. Part 3, Rise to Power. From technology czar to apparent heir. When Kim Jong-nam returned to North Korea in the late 1980s, he was a transformed figure, fluent in several languages, well-traveled, and intellectually curious. He was not merely the secret son of Kim Jong-il anymore. He had become a man with a modern vision, shaped by years abroad in the Soviet Union, Switzerland, and China. His return, however, was not met with immediate celebration or a public announcement. It was, as ever in North Korea, done in quiet steps, with careful orchestration behind the curtain of the regime. Though his existence had long been hidden from the public, within elite circles there were murmurs. Kim Jong-il's eldest son was back. He was young, intelligent, cosmopolitan, and crucially, he was the first male descendant of the Kim line to be reared into adulthood. For a regime deeply rooted in Confucian principles of bloodline and patriarchy, this was no small detail. Many within the party, military, and family circle began to view Jong-nam as the natural successor, even if his status was still unofficial. At just 17 years old in 1988, Jong-nam was appointed chairman of the Computer Committee of North Korea, a newly established institution that placed him at the forefront of a field the regime only dimly understood at the time: information technology. This role was far more than symbolic. In a country where even the use of radios was tightly restricted and foreign news was forbidden, Jong-nam was entrusted with exploring a world beyond the control of the state, the digital frontier. Under his direction, North Korea began to cautiously build its cyber infrastructure. Jong-nam played a central role in establishing the Korean Computer Center, KCC, which would become the country's main institution for software development, computer science education, and even cyber warfare capabilities. The KCC was not merely a vanity project for a princeling. It represented the embryonic stages of North Korea's attempt to leap into the modern age through technology, innovation, and information systems. Jong-nam supervised projects at elite institutions like Kim Il-sung University and Kim Chek University of Technology, personally overseeing programming efforts and pushing for the development of a homegrown IT workforce. He was instrumental in introducing North Korean students to the basics of coding, digital design, and cybersecurity. For a time, he was the public face, albeit limited to internal audiences, of the regime's move toward technological modernization. This effort extended to the military. Under Jong-nam's influence, key military communications infrastructure, including underground fiber optic cable systems, was developed to shield the regime from potential espionage. He was said to be involved in establishing digital command centers and laying the groundwork for what would eventually become North Korea's infamous cyber army, one of the most capable and feared digital warfare units in the world today. For many observers within the elite, this period marked Jong-nam's ascent as the likely successor to his father. His technical acumen, international sophistication, and early embrace of reform-oriented thinking set him apart from other potential heirs. His birthday celebrations continued to be extravagant, and he remained the only grandchild known to be openly celebrated by Kim Il-sung. One oft-repeated anecdote claimed that up to $1 million were spent annually on his birthday gifts alone, a gesture not just of affection, but of recognition. His growing status was reflected in his transportation, too. Jong-nam was frequently seen being chauffeured in a Mercedes-Benz to Pyongyang's Koryo Hotel, where he would reportedly indulge in lavish parties. He was a man of wealth and influence, and according to defectors and foreign intelligence sources, he did not shy away from enjoying the lifestyle that came with his position. On occasion, he was said to spend upwards of $100 in a single night, a staggering amount in a country where many citizens survived on the equivalent of a few dollars per month. Beyond his IT portfolio, Jong-nam was believed to be entrusted with managing the secret overseas accounts of the Kim family, a responsibility that spoke volumes about the level of trust placed in him. These accounts, estimated to contain billions of dollars, were used to support the regime's clandestine activities, ranging from arms trading to slush funds for the leadership's personal use. Jong-nam's familiarity with the outside world made him an ideal candidate to handle such complex, covert financial operations. His network spanned the globe: Macau, Hong Kong, Switzerland, Singapore, the United Kingdom, and Japan. Through these financial centers, he managed investments in stocks, real estate, and banks on behalf of the regime in the enigmatic Office 39, a shadowy bureau responsible for procuring hard currency for North Korea's elite. Some reports even referred to him as the de facto head of Office 39, though this was never officially confirmed. In 1995, his formal power expanded again. He was named a general in the Korean People's Army, a move that added military credentials to his growing portfolio. The following year, he was appointed to oversee the newly formed Korean People's Army Security Command, North Korea's version of a secret police within the military. This organization was tasked with ensuring loyalty within the ranks, suppressing dissent, and monitoring high-level officers. To be given such authority at a relatively young age spoke not only to his status within the regime, but also to the internal confidence that he was being groomed for the highest office. Yet despite this meteoric rise, signs of tension were already emerging. Jong-nam, increasingly aware of the regime's brutality and stagnation, began to voice private doubts. He expressed frustration with life in Pyongyang and Wonsan, where he felt confined and isolated, According to those close to him, he questioned the moral and ideological underpinnings of the system he was meant to inherit. This disillusionment deepened in the early 1990s, when he was reportedly assigned to observe and participate in internal audits of state-run factories. It was during these tours that he witnessed the darker side of the North Korean system. Underperforming factory managers were publicly denounced, stripped of their dignity, and sometimes executed. For a man who had spent much of his youth in the relative freedom of the West, these spectacles were horrifying. They revealed to him a political order built not on rational governance or development, but on fear, cruelty, and absolute control. Jong-nam's growing unease did not go unnoticed by his father. Kim Jong-il, though proud of his son's technical achievements, began to view his independent thinking and criticism of the regime with suspicion. He warned Jong-nam that political disloyalty, even from family, would not be tolerated. At one point, it is said, Kim Jong-il threatened to send his own son to work in the coal mines as punishment for voicing dissent. Despite these warnings, Jong-nam did not temper his curiosity or his quiet resistance. He continued to explore new ideas, especially the concept of reform without collapse, the notion that North Korea could adopt a Chinese-style opening while maintaining its political structure. But in Pyongyang, such thoughts were heretical. To question the system was to question the revolution and the family that embodied it. And as other contenders began to emerge within the Kim household, most notably the younger, more pliable Kim Jong-un, Jong-nam's position began to erode, not from a lack of competence or vision, but because he saw too clearly what was wrong and dared to think about change. What had once seemed like the rise of a future leader was beginning to feel like the slow descent of a man out of step with the kingdom he was born to rule. Part 4, Fall from Grace, the Disneyland Incident and Exile. By the dawn of the new millennium, Kim Jong-nam stood as one of the most prominent figures within North Korea's ruling elite. He had cultivated a reputation as a modern thinker, a reform-minded technocrat, and, at least in the eyes of some observers, the probable successor to his father, Kim Jong-il. He had built cyber institutions, led financial networks across Asia, and commanded influential state and military bodies. Yet in 2001, a single event would trigger his sudden and irreversible fall from favor. That event would become known as the Disneyland incident, an international embarrassment that shattered the illusion of his invincibility and would ultimately exile him from the very state he was born to rule. In early May 2001, Kim Jong-nam, traveling under a false identity, attempted to enter Japan using a forged Dominican Republic passport. Accompanied by 2 women and a young boy, believed to be his wife, concubine, and son, Jong-nam sought entry at Tokyo's Narita International Airport. The purpose of his visit, allegedly, to take his family to Tokyo Disneyland. If true, it was a shockingly human desire for a man raised in a dictatorship, one that had long condemned Western decadence and capitalism, and yet secretly craved it. But what might have been a quiet, private indulgence quickly exploded into a full-blown diplomatic scandal. Japanese immigration officials, suspicious of his forged documents and inconsistent answers, detained Jong-nam and his party. Though he claimed to be a Chinese national named Pang Xiong, Fat Bear, he was quickly identified by Japanese and South Korean intelligence as Kim Jong-nam, the son of North Korea's leader. The Japanese media had a field day. Images of the chubby, tattooed man in custody began circulating globally. He reportedly bore a large tattoo of a tiger on his back, an unusual mark for a member of North Korea's cloistered elite. Though neither the Japanese nor the North Korean government formally confirmed his identity, the incident caused considerable embarrassment on the world stage. It shattered the mystique of the Kim family, whose members were rarely seen in public and even more rarely caught in moments of weakness or folly. In North Korea, the reaction was swift and severe. Kim Jong-il, already known for his authoritarian tendencies and paranoia, was reportedly enraged. The idea that his eldest son, the presumed heir, had not only forged a passport, but attempted to sneak into Japan to visit an amusement park, was more than just a scandal. It was, in the eyes of the regime, a betrayal of image, ideology, and loyalty, and it was unforgivable. Jong-nam was immediately recalled. He was stripped of his roles and privileges, subjected to internal investigation, and placed under temporary house arrest. The informal succession plans that had once seemed all but confirmed were abruptly frozen. From that point forward, Kim Jong-nam was effectively removed from the line of succession. Although he was never publicly denounced, his disappearance from the North Korean media, official functions, and state affairs spoke volumes. Unable, or perhaps unwilling, to remain under the strict gaze of Pyongyang's watchful eyes, Jong-nam began a life of semi-exile abroad. He first relocated to Beijing and later to Macau, a former Portuguese colony that had become a haven for wealthy elites and discreet businessmen. There he led a lifestyle both lavish and elusive. He frequented high-end casinos, lived in luxury apartments, and traveled freely across Asia, often under assumed names. He remained in contact with family members and North Korean insiders, but he was no longer part of the ruling apparatus. Some reports suggested he continued to manage secret financial networks for the regime, while others argued he had been completely sidelined. The truth, as always in North Korean affairs, was likely somewhere in between. He may have retained access to funds and maintained connections with former allies, but his political future had been irreparably damaged. He was now seen not as a rising star, but as a liability. Meanwhile, the regime began subtly shifting attention to Kim Jong-il's younger sons, particularly Kim Jong-un. Though years younger than Jong-nam and largely unknown to the public, Jong-un was raised within the protective fold of the inner court. He had no known scandals, had never lived abroad for long periods, and was viewed as more controllable by his father and the party elders. His rise would take years to become visible, but the seeds were planted in the vacuum left by Jong-nam's disgrace. The Disneyland incident became a cautionary tale, one that symbolized the conflict between personal freedom and dynastic duty. Jong-nam, having seen the outside world and grown accustomed to its liberties, had made a miscalculation. In seeking a moment of private joy, he had exposed the regime to public ridicule and shattered the narrative of invulnerability that surrounded the Kim family. He had revealed himself to be fallible, and in doing so, had committed the greatest sin of all in a dynasty built on myth. He had been seen. Years later, when asked by a Japanese journalist why he had tried to enter Japan, Jong-nam gave a simple, almost heartbreaking answer. "I was curious. I wanted to go to Disneyland." But curiosity had a cost. For Kim Jong-nam, it meant exile, suspicion, and the permanent loss of the future he had once seemed destined to inherit. He became a man in political limbo, no longer welcome in Pyongyang, yet unable to fully escape its reach. As his younger half-brother began to rise in prominence, Jong-nam found himself drifting further into obscurity. He remained a princeling without a palace, a would-be reformer without a state. His fall was not the result of a coup or assassination, but of something far more mundane and thus far more tragic. A family trip that never happened, a theme park visit that marked the end of a dynasty's hopes for modernization. Yet even in exile, Kim Jong-nam would not remain silent. The years ahead would reveal a man who still believed in a different future for his homeland, and who would pay the ultimate price for that belief. Part 5, Life in Exile, A Prince Without a Kingdom. After the humiliating fallout from the 2001 Disneyland incident, Kim Jong-nam's life took a decisive turn. The fall from grace was swift and irreversible. Once viewed as the future of the Kim dynasty, he was now a prince in exile, wandering, watched, and whispered about, but no longer welcome in the country of his birth. The man who had been groomed for leadership, who had walked the halls of Pyongyang's most powerful institutions, now found himself a political outcast, drifting across Asia with a dwindling circle of allies and an uncertain future. His exile did not begin with chains or exile edicts, but with silence. There was no formal announcement, no state decree. Instead, he simply disappeared from state media, from official rosters, from the careful choreography of North Korea's ruling elite. In a regime where image is everything, his vanishing act spoke volumes. Those who had once supported him quickly distanced themselves. The shadow of suspicion loomed large. In the immediate aftermath, Kim Jong-nam relocated to Beijing, where he remained under the informal watch and occasional protection of Chinese authorities. Later, he settled in Macau, a small, semi-autonomous territory on China's southern coast, known for its casinos, luxury hotels, and its role as a discreet hub for international finance. There he lived a life of semi-invisibility, present but rarely seen. His movements were erratic. He traveled frequently under various aliases, using forged or diplomatic passports bearing names like Kim Chol or Pang Xiong. Security was tight, so was his isolation. Yet exile did not mean poverty. Jong-nam continued to live comfortably, at least for a time. Reports indicated that he occupied high-end hotels or apartments, dined well, and indulged in gambling and nightlife. His expenses, according to intelligence sources, were funded through a combination of personal wealth, North Korean state funds, and support from Chinese intelligence agencies who had an interest in keeping him close and alive. His family life, though largely kept from public view, was complex. He reportedly had multiple partners and children spread across different countries. In Macau, he was said to maintain 4 separate households, providing for his families and shielding them from public scrutiny. His eldest son, Kim Han-sol, would later come to public attention as an articulate and Western-educated youth who, like his father, would carry the burden of a name that history would not forget. But for Jong-nam, the years following his exile were not idle. Though removed from the center of power, he kept close watch on developments inside North Korea. He maintained contact with insiders, former allies, and watchers of the regime. He granted occasional interviews to journalists, usually off the record or via email, and expressed with growing frankness his disillusionment with the regime he was once expected to inherit. He criticized the succession system that had elevated his younger half-brother, Kim Jong-un. He lamented the lack of reform and the increasing isolation of the country under his family's rule. He made clear in both words and deeds that he had no desire to reclaim power or challenge his brother directly, but his very existence, his lineage, and his knowledge of the regime's secrets made him dangerous. Over time, North Korea came to view Kim Jong-nam not just as a disappointment, but as a potential threat. His connections to foreign governments, especially China, added layers of suspicion. Beijing, for its part, seemed to treat him as a strategic asset, a potential pawn in the event of regime collapse in Pyongyang. There were whispers that Jong-nam could serve as the face of a provisional government, or a stabilizing figure if civil war erupted within the Hermit Kingdom. In this role, he became more than just an exiled relative. He became an insurance policy. As the years passed, Jong-nam's finances began to fluctuate. After the execution of his uncle Jang Song-thaek in 2013, a man who had once been his protector and benefactor, his access to North Korean funds reportedly dried up. Living in luxury suddenly became more difficult. He began to struggle with hotel payments, and at least once was evicted from his residence in Macau after failing to pay a $15,000 bill. Chinese operatives continued to provide security and some financial support, but it was no longer guaranteed or lavish. This slow unraveling of resources pushed him into even more dangerous territory. To maintain his lifestyle and to protect his family, he allegedly began cooperating with foreign intelligence agencies, including the CIA. While the full extent of these relationships remains unknown, it is clear that Kim Jong-nam provided information, willingly or otherwise, about North Korea's internal workings, financial networks, and leadership dynamics. To Pyongyang, this was treason. The Kim regime, already paranoid by design, saw Jong-nam as a loose end that needed tying up. A man with the bloodline to challenge their authority, the knowledge to expose their secrets, and the connections to make a difference. He had become a liability. Still, Jong-nam appeared unafraid, at least outwardly. He continued to travel, albeit cautiously. He visited Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and even reportedly made trips to Europe. He met friends and journalists in cafes and hotel lobbies, and often used pseudonyms and disguises to shield his movements. But behind the relaxed demeanor, the sense of danger never left him. In rare interviews and private correspondence, he revealed a fatalistic view of his life. He did not see himself as a revolutionary or a leader in waiting. He saw himself as a man caught between worlds, no longer part of the dictatorship, but forever bound to it by name and blood. "I have no interest in politics," he once said. "I want to live quietly, away from power." But power, even when disclaimed, follows a Kim like a shadow. And in the coming years, that shadow would darken. His brother's rise to power would intensify the danger. His ties to Chinese officials and Western intelligence agencies would put a target on his back. And in the end, exile would prove not to be a refuge, but a waiting room before tragedy. Part 6. The Assassination. VX and the Last Journey. By early 2017, Kim Jong-nam had lived over 15 years in the shadow of exile. He had outlasted several assassination rumors, financial cutoffs, political purges, and the collapse of his uncle's power base. But the protective veil once afforded by his family name, his Chinese patrons, and his own discretion had begun to wear thin. His very survival, long considered remarkable by Korea watchers, now seemed precarious. What Jong-nam did not know, or perhaps refused to believe, was that the noose had already been drawn. In the final days of his life, Kim Jong-nam appeared to be living his usual routine. On February 13, 2017, he arrived at Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia, preparing to board a flight to Macau. He was traveling under a pseudonym, as he often did, carrying a North Korean passport in the name Kim Jong-il, born June 10, 1970. He had taken these steps many times before, always mindful of his identity, but never able to fully escape it. What unfolded next was the stuff of spy novels and dystopian thrillers. As he stood before a self-check-in kiosk for Air Asia, two women approached him from opposite directions. In seconds, they carried out what appeared to be a simple prank. One smeared a cloth across his face, while the other sprayed an unknown substance. Jong-nam staggered, confused and alarmed, and made his way to the airport's medical station, gasping that he had been attacked. Within minutes, his condition deteriorated rapidly. As he was rushed to Putrajaya Hospital, he suffered seizures, collapsed, and was pronounced dead in transit. He was 45 years old. The world was stunned. Within hours, news broke across Asia that the victim was likely Kim Jong-nam. Initial confusion surrounded the use of his alias and the bizarre circumstances, but soon multiple sources, especially from South Korea's National Intelligence Service, confirmed that the eldest son of Kim Jong-il had been assassinated in broad daylight on foreign soil. The Malaysian authorities, upon conducting a forensic investigation, uncovered the chilling truth. The substance used to kill Jong-nam was identified as VX nerve agent, one of the most lethal chemical weapons ever developed. A drop the size of a pinhead is enough to kill. Colorless, odorless, and fast-acting, VX is classified by the United Nations as a weapon of mass destruction and banned under international law. Its use in a civilian airport was unprecedented. Its message was unmistakable. Almost immediately, suspicion fell on North Korea. Though Pyongyang issued a flurry of denials, claiming that the deceased was merely a North Korean citizen who had died of a heart attack, the international community saw through the fog of propaganda. This was not a random act of violence. This was an assassination, state-sanctioned, meticulously planned, and politically motivated. The two women involved in the attack were swiftly arrested. One was a Vietnamese national, Doan Thi Huong. The other, Siti Aisyah, was Indonesian. Their testimonies painted a picture as surreal as it was tragic. Both claimed they had been tricked by North Korean agents into believing they were participating in a hidden camera prank show. In the days prior, they had been paid small amounts to smear oil or harmless liquids on the faces of strangers in shopping malls and airports. They insisted they had no knowledge of the deadly nature of their final assignment. Their defense raised difficult questions about agency, manipulation, and the cold calculation of those who orchestrated the plot. The true culprits, 4 North Korean operatives alleged to have trained and directed the women fled Malaysia the same day as the murder, boarding a flight to Jakarta, then onward to Pyongyang via Moscow and Vladivostok. Interpol issued red notices, but North Korea refused to cooperate. Further investigations revealed that the operation bore the hallmark of North Korea's military intelligence apparatus, specifically the Reconnaissance General Bureau's elite Unit 180, long suspected of running espionage and assassination missions. The method, the timing, and the target all pointed to a single motive: the elimination of a threat to Kim Jong-un's unchallenged rule. Jong-nam had never openly challenged his younger brother. In fact, in interviews, he expressed his disinterest in politics and his wish to live peacefully in exile. But for Kim Jong-un, by then firmly entrenched as supreme leader, his elder half-brother's very existence posed a symbolic danger. Jong-nam had the bloodline, the foreign contacts, and the experience abroad to serve as an alternative figurehead should a crisis emerge in Pyongyang. There were also rumors, some later confirmed by intelligence agencies, that Jong-nam had met with U.S. operatives in the months before his death. Malaysian authorities would later testify that 4 days before his assassination, he had met with an American believed to be a CIA agent. He had reportedly provided information about North Korean activities, possibly in exchange for financial support or protection for his family. If true, it meant that Jong-nam had crossed an invisible line, one his brother could not allow. To the regime, he had become more than an exiled princeling. He had become a liability with access to secrets, a connection to foreign powers, and a name that could rally opposition. After his death, his body remained in Malaysian custody, sparking a tense diplomatic standoff. North Korea demanded the immediate return of the corpse and denied that it was Kim Jong-nam at all, maintaining the fiction that the man was Kim Jong-il. Malaysia refused, insisting on a full autopsy and verification process. Eventually, under pressure and negotiation, reportedly mediated by Chinese officials, Malaysia agreed to repatriate the body in exchange for the release of 9 Malaysian citizens who had been barred from leaving Pyongyang. Even in death, Kim Jong-nam had become a bargaining chip, a man whose fate was tied not only to the internal politics of his homeland, but to the fragile web of diplomacy between nations. His assassination marked a turning point in global perception of the North Korean regime. It underscored the brutality with which Kim Jong-un would eliminate rivals, even those related to him by blood. It also served as a grim warning to other dissidents, defectors, and potential threats abroad. Kim Jong-nam's murder was not only an act of state terror, it was an execution carried out in the open, on foreign soil, with a weapon of mass destruction. It shattered any illusions of moderation that observers may have hoped for in the new North Korean leadership. The eldest son of Kim Jong-il, once considered heir to a dynasty, died alone in an airport, wearing a jacket with a cartoon character on the back, clutching a few personal belongings. There was no honor guard, no final ceremony, no mourning procession in Pyongyang. Just a still frame on a grainy security camera, marking the final moments of a life lived between privilege and peril. Part 7. Global Shockwaves. The aftermath, trials, and diplomatic fallout. The assassination of Kim Jong-nam on February 13, 2017, was not just a personal tragedy, it sent tremors across the globe. The brazenness of the act, the use of VX nerve agent in a busy international airport, and the victim's identity as the estranged half-brother of a sitting dictator combined to create one of the most politically charged murders of the 21st century. For days, headlines screamed from newsstands and television screens, "North Korea kills its own." The image of Jong-nam's final moments, caught on surveillance footage as he clutched his face and staggered through Kuala Lumpur International Airport, haunted the public consciousness. The brutality of the method and the setting, a peaceful civilian hub, stood in stark contrast to the myth of Kim family invincibility and secrecy. As Malaysian authorities worked to confirm his identity and investigate the crime, international scrutiny intensified. On February 14, just 1 day after the murder, Malaysian officials announced that the man traveling under the name Kim Jong-il, was in fact Kim Jong-nam. His identity was verified through fingerprint records provided by South Korea and other intelligence services. The post-mortem confirmed what investigators feared. Jong-nam had been killed by VX, a weapon so lethal that it is banned under the 1993 Chemical Weapons Convention. Malaysia's then Prime Minister Najib Razak, under intense global pressure, pledged a full and transparent investigation. And indeed, Malaysian authorities wasted no time. Within hours of the attack, they arrested the two female assailants, Joan Thi Huong, a 28-year-old Vietnamese national, and Siti Aisyah, a 25-year-old Indonesian. Both women offered the same defense. They believed they had been hired for a prank TV show. Their claim initially sounded implausible, but as details emerged, it gained chilling credibility. In the days leading up to the assassination, both women had indeed been seen on CCTV performing what appeared to be mock pranks on strangers, rubbing oil or cream on faces and laughing as if it were part of a show. They had been recruited by North Korean operatives who posed as producers and paid them small sums for their performances. Neither woman had the training or protective gear necessary to handle VX. It seemed unlikely that they knew the substance was lethal. Malaysian prosecutors, however, charged both with murder, a crime that carries the death penalty in the country. Their trials, held separately, became international spectacles. Human rights organizations, legal scholars, and foreign governments closely monitored proceedings. As months passed, pressure grew, particularly from Indonesia and Vietnam, whose governments sought diplomatic channels to repatriate their citizens. Meanwhile, the four North Korean men who had directed the operation, believed to be intelligence agents, fled Malaysia on the very day of the killing. Malaysian police identified them and issued arrest warrants. Interpol circulated red notices. But by then, the operatives had safely returned to Pyongyang, aided by carefully coordinated escape routes through Jakarta, Dubai, Moscow, and Vladivostok. North Korea denied their involvement, claimed that Kim Jong-nam died of a heart attack, and dismissed the use of VX as fabricated anti-DPRK propaganda. The diplomatic crisis escalated. Malaysia, which had long maintained one of the few relatively friendly relationships with Pyongyang, took unprecedented action. It expelled the North Korean ambassador, suspended visa-free travel agreements for North Korean citizens, and began restricting the movements of North Korean diplomats. Pyongyang retaliated by barring 9 Malaysian citizens from leaving North Korea, effectively taking them hostage. The crisis reached a fever pitch. For weeks, the two countries teetered on the edge of a complete diplomatic breakdown. China, quietly alarmed, stepped in behind the scenes. While it did not publicly condemn the assassination, it facilitated negotiations between the two parties. On March 30th, 2017, a deal was struck. The body of Kim Jong-nam would be returned to North Korea, and Malaysia's hostages would be released. The agreement was a delicate balancing act. Though Malaysia maintained the legal high ground, it sought to avoid further provocation. North Korea, as expected, continued to insist that the man killed was not Kim Jong-nam. In the legal realm, developments continued. On March 11, 2019, after lengthy diplomatic lobbying and a high-profile campaign by Indonesia, the Malaysian government dropped charges against Siti Aisyah, who was then released and repatriated. A month later, the charge against Joan Thi Huong was reduced from murder to causing injury with a dangerous weapon. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison. With credit for time served and early release provisions, she was freed on May 3, 2019. The world reacted with a mix of relief and resignation. Many accepted that the true masterminds of the operation would never face justice. The women, though central to the plot, had been manipulated, used as pawns in a ruthless game of state-sponsored murder. The real responsibility, most observers agreed, lay at the feet of Kim Jong-un and the intelligence apparatus of the DPRK. Western governments responded with both outrage and action. In November 2017, the United States redesignated North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism, citing the assassination as evidence. In March 2018, the U.S. government formally concluded that North Korea was responsible for Jong-nam's murder, using VX and issued additional sanctions. North Korea's denial of involvement remained unrelenting. State media attacked Malaysia, South Korea, and the United States, claiming the entire incident was a conspiracy orchestrated by hostile forces. The regime never acknowledged that the victim was Kim Jong-nam, not even in death. His name was erased from the official narrative, a ghost buried beneath the political machinery of dynastic rule. But the story did not end there. Jong-nam's assassination had a ripple effect far beyond diplomatic cables and courtrooms. It heightened global awareness of North Korea's espionage capabilities. It reinforced the brutality of Kim Jong-un's leadership, and it shattered any illusion that familial ties could restrain the regime's thirst for total control. His death also changed the calculus for foreign governments, particularly China. For years, Beijing had quietly shielded Kim Jong-nam, seeing him as a possible alternative in the event of North Korea's collapse. His assassination on foreign soil, however, served as a warning. Even China's protection was not sacred. In the aftermath, Beijing recalibrated its approach to the Kim regime, tightening security around defectors and exiles while subtly increasing leverage over Pyongyang through economic means. For many watching from the outside, the case of Kim Jong-nam became a symbol of the limits of blood loyalty, the ruthlessness of absolute power, and the silent tragedies that play out behind palace walls. His murder was not merely an assassination, it was the public erasure of an inconvenient truth. Kim Jong-nam died without ceremony, no official obituary, no televised funeral, no mourning portraits hung in Pyongyang. The dynasty he once belonged to denied him in life and tried to erase him in death, but history would not forget. Part 8, The Son Who Survived, Legacy, Family, and the Secret Resistance. In the aftermath of Kim Jong-nam's assassination, questions arose not just about who had ordered the killing, but about who would be next. His murder had exposed a brutal truth. In Kim Jong-un's North Korea, no one, not even family, was beyond the reach of the state's vengeance. That fear now extended to Jong-nam's own family, especially his son, Kim Han-sol, the young man now carrying the weight of the Kim dynasty's exiled bloodline. Born in 1995, Han-sol had led a life as unusual as his father's. He was raised in relative anonymity, mostly outside North Korea, under the protective shield of Jong-nam's international movements. Unlike other members of the Kim family, he was educated in the West, from prestigious international schools to elite universities. In 2011, he gained brief global attention when he appeared in a televised interview as a freshman at the United World College in Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Soft-spoken with gentle features and Western mannerisms, Han-sol shocked viewers by speaking candidly about the Kim family. He described his uncle Kim Jong-un as a dictator, spoke of his sorrow over the suffering of the North Korean people, and said he dreamed of a reunified Korea. He even expressed shame about the actions of his own relatives, words that would be unthinkable coming from inside the regime. That interview made headlines, but it also painted a target on his back. When Kim Jong-nam was murdered in 2017, speculation immediately turned to Han-sol. Would he be next? Would the regime move to eliminate the only surviving direct descendant of Kim Jong-il, who remained outside its control? The answer came in a form few had expected. Shortly after Jong-nam's death, a previously unknown organization stepped forward, Chelima Civil Defense, later rebranded as Free Joseon. The group released a grainy video showing a nervous young man, clean-cut, seated in front of a camera, speaking in English. "My name is Kim Han-sol," he said. "I am the son of Kim Jong-nam." He thanked unnamed individuals for their help and said his mother and sister were also safe. Then the video ended. The clip lasted less than a minute, but its implications were enormous. Who was behind this group? How had they found Han-sol so quickly? And who had the resources, networks, and courage to extract the last surviving heir of the exiled branch of the Kim dynasty just days after his father was murdered? Free Joseon offered few answers. In a public statement, they claimed to have rescued Han-sol and his immediate family from Macau within 72 hours of the assassination. They said they feared for his life and acted swiftly to extract him before North Korean agents could do the same. They also thanked several governments, including the United States, the Netherlands, and China, for assisting in what they called a humanitarian operation. Their efforts, they implied, were not just about protecting a boy. They were about preserving a symbol, perhaps even a future alternative. Han-sol vanished after that. His current whereabouts remain a closely guarded secret. Intelligence experts believe he is under protection by a Western government, likely the United States or a European ally. Others suspect he has changed his identity entirely and lives in seclusion. Only a handful of people likely know the full truth. But Free Joseon did not disappear. The group soon gained global attention with increasingly daring acts, defacing North Korean embassies, hacking regime propaganda sites, and even staging a 2019 raid on the North Korean embassy in Madrid, an incident that sparked international headlines and diplomatic tension. While their true goals remained ambiguous, some called them resistance fighters, others labeled them rogue activists. They had clearly emerged as the loudest, boldest voice of anti-Kim opposition from outside the peninsula. They claimed no political party, no geographic base, and no desire for personal power. What they did claim was a mission to fight against the Kim regime, protect defectors, and support the dream of a free, unified Korea. For some, they were romantic freedom fighters. For others, a dangerous provocation. What role, if any, Han-sol played in this movement remained unclear. Was he merely a rescued figure, now out of danger? Or did he harbor deeper ambitions, fueled by his father's unfinished legacy? There were no public appearances, no statements, no leaks. His silence was perhaps the greatest shield he had. But Jong-nam's death had created a vacuum, and in North Korean politics, even the mere shadow of an alternative can be powerful. To the regime, Han-sol represented a potential symbol of legitimacy for opposition forces or foreign governments. He was, in effect, the last surviving male of Kim Jong-il's bloodline outside the direct control of Kim Jong-un. In Confucian societies like North Korea, where lineage still holds enormous weight, that mattered. Though Jong-nam had never positioned himself as a revolutionary or a claimant to power, his son's survival raised a haunting possibility that the dynasty's exile branch had not been extinguished, only hidden. The legacy of Kim Jong-nam, therefore, lives on not through statues or state museums, but through a son in hiding, protected by a secretive network of dissidents and guarded by intelligence agencies across continents. It lives on through the whispered conversations among defectors, the quiet analysis of foreign diplomats, and the digital traces of Free Joseon's cyber campaigns. It lives on in the idea that the dynasty is not monolithic, that within its bloodline there once existed a man who saw the world, understood change, and wished for something different. For Kim Jong-nam, legacy is not written in stone. It is encrypted in silence, encrypted in survival, and, perhaps, waiting for its time. Part 9, A Life Between Worlds. Reflection, erasure, and the echo of what could have been. In the long, dark history of dynasties, there are names that shine in glory and others that vanish in silence. And then there are those like Kim Jong-nam, names caught in the in-between, haunted by both destiny and detachment. His life was neither that of a ruler nor of a rebel, but of a man suspended between two irreconcilable worlds. The North Korea he was born to lead, and the outside world that shaped his spirit. His story is one of almosts. He was almost the heir, almost the modernizer, almost the reformist bridge between isolation and engagement. But in the end, he became something else entirely, a living contradiction to the very myth his family had spent decades constructing. Born into the shadow of revolution, yet raised on the margins of legitimacy, Kim Jong-nam spent much of his life in places that were neither truly home nor entirely foreign. He lived in Pyongyang but was hidden from public view. He studied in Switzerland and China, yet never shook free from the invisible leash of the regime. He carried a legacy of privilege, but with it a sentence of suspicion. What defined him most was not power, but displacement. Even at the height of his influence, leading North Korea's early IT initiatives, managing secret financial networks, overseeing security agencies, he remained curiously peripheral to the central apparatus of state ideology. His curiosity, compassion, and reformist instincts made him ill-suited for the ruthless world of hereditary dictatorship. And when his need for personal freedom collided with the system's demand for total loyalty, exile became his only path. Yet exile did not bring liberation. It brought surveillance, constraint, and danger. He traveled under fake names. He was guarded by foreign agents. He was monitored by enemies and protected by friends who may have viewed him as a strategic card rather than a person. Even his own statements, rare, careful, and often relayed through intermediaries, reflected a man who had learned to speak in shadows. And then came the silence. After his murder in 2017, Jong-nam did not receive a funeral befitting a member of the ruling family. His name was not mourned in state media. His portrait did not hang beside his father's. His death was not acknowledged. He was scrubbed from the official narrative, just as he had been hidden during his youth. The regime sought to erase him not only from the political arena, but from memory itself. But history is not so easily edited. In academic circles, human rights reports, intelligence briefings, and exile communities, Kim Jong-nam's life continues to spark debate and reflection. To some, he was a tragic figure, a man burdened by a birthright he neither asked for nor could escape. To others, he represented a lost opportunity for North Korea, a leader who had seen the world, who admired China's model of cautious reform, who might have guided his country toward openness without total collapse. What might North Korea have looked like if Kim Jong-nam had become its third supreme leader instead of Kim Jong-un? Would he have dismantled the prison camps, allowed internet access, pursued peace over provocation? We will never know. But the question lingers in the minds of many who study the region. In that question lies his most powerful legacy, not what he did, but what he might have done. He was a man who spoke of healing the divisions of the Korean peninsula, who denounced 3 generations of dynastic rule even as it coursed through his own veins, who said simply and sincerely that he wanted to live a normal life, one free from power, expectation, and paranoia. Perhaps it is that desire for normalcy that defines Kim Jong-nam more than anything else. In a family bound by rituals of fear and spectacle, he chose honesty. In a state that demanded uniformity, he lived as an individual. And in a regime that worshipped bloodline above all else, he quietly renounced the crown. In the end, Kim Jong-nam died as he lived, in transit, alone, anonymous, his fate sealed in a sterile airport far from home. No throne, no palace, no final words, just a man whose life was shaped by proximity to power and whose death revealed the lengths that power will go to preserve itself. But his story endures, not just in intelligence files and political analysis, but in the soft-spoken courage of his son, the bold defiance of Free Jae-seon, and the lingering hope that one day North Korea might become the place he once imagined it could be. A place where a child of the dynasty could speak freely, where differences did not mean exile, where curiosity was not punished with death. Kim Jong-nam's life may have been erased from the official record, but it has been written indelibly into history's margins. And sometimes the margins are where the truth survives longest.